The holy sword that once shone brilliantly in the hands of the sword saint was now displayed in the slums for 20 years, with no one showing interest. Everyone believed it was just a broken sword, but the boy fell in love with it at first sight. He desperately wanted to buy it, yet even if he went without food or drink, 3,000 years of salary wouldn't be enough. Just then, the boy's childhood friend spoke up. "Idiot, if you like it, I'll buy it for you," the boy said. "But it's very expensive." The girl said, "It's just a broken sword. How expensive could it be?" The girl said with unusual determination, "Call me sister and I'll pay for it in full." The boy stared at the holy sword and said, 5 gold coins. The atmosphere immediately became awkward, as Mina hadn't expected a broken sword to be so expensive. She held her chin and observed carefully, saying, 5 gold coins? That's enough for me to spend for 200 years. Fred could only laugh awkwardly at this, but just then a rough and angry voice came from not far away. "What do you mean, broken sword? Get lost. This isn't a toy for you poor folks." As the words fell, a burly old man angrily rushed at the two of them. This person was the blacksmith shop owner, but Mina said calmly, "Old man, are you crazy? This is the slums. There are only poor people here." That seemed right. The old man was speechless. He could only angrily scold her for being rude. Mina wasn't about to back down either, cursing him back as an old geyser. Before they could come to blows, Fred quickly pulled Mina away. But the old man behind them was still indignant, because when the girl was nearly starving to death, he had given her food and saved her life. Why didn't she show him any gratitude? The old man walked angrily toward the blacksmith shop while thinking, but when he looked down, he actually saw the deep footprints in front of the holy sword. The old man sighed helplessly and said, "How long has he been standing here? But no matter how much you like it, I can't give you the sword. I know very well that people from the slums can never escape the slums, and my masterpiece is destined to shine before the whole world." It turned out the boy was just a candle-selling clerk at some hotel in the slums. His parents died early. He was taken in by the shop owner, Sanji, and treated like his own son. So to repay this kindness, Fred's salary was basically zero. But even so, he still worked wholeheartedly for this job. This day, hostile forces from the slums came looking for trouble. Fred looked up. The leader turned out to be one-armed Jack. He was one of the 5 major forces in the slums. The other 4 were Knight Sanji, Butcher Black Bear, Gambler Tease, Ware Fee. The most powerful was none other than Jack, who constantly thought about how to swallow the other 4 and monopolize the slums alone. So Jack came, today under the guise of negotiation to cause trouble. He said, "Hey kid, where's your boss?" After hearing this, Fred didn't answer, just stared at Jack with determined eyes. Jack himself had come. Should I fight or before Fred could think? Jack's subordinate Xiaojia couldn't hold back and said, "You brat, didn't you hear what our boss said?" Fred answered without any emotion, "I don't know. I'm just a candle seller." Seeing this, Xiao flew into a rage, cursing continuously, and slapped the box full of candles, knocking the candles all over the floor. Seeing this, everyone present held their breath. A big fight seemed unavoidable, but Fred not only didn't get angry, he even bent down and started picking up the candles. Xiao was stunned, then trembled with anger. He said, "You brat, don't you understand the situation?" But Fred remained unmoved, even asked him to move his foot. At this moment, Xiao could no longer hold back. He directly lifted his foot and kicked viciously toward Fred. Fred quickly moved the stick to his right hand, then swept forcefully at Xiao's supporting leg, lifting him into the air, then assumed a stance with full force, directly sent Xiaojia flying. This scene directly shocked everyone present, but Jack showed a meaningful smile, even stopped his angry subordinates. Jack said, "I like you very much, but I only have one hand, so I couldn't stop Xiaoxia. Please forgive me." But Fred said nonchalantly, I don't discriminate against disabled people." Jack laughed heartily after hearing this, but the next second, Jack's expression changed 380 degrees. His whole body erupted with terrifying pressure, saying, "How about we talk privately?" However, Fred wasn't crushed by his pressure. His eyes remained as determined as ever. The atmosphere was tense for a few seconds. Fortunately, Sanji's voice suddenly rang out. "So, it's Jack. Why didn't you tell me you were coming in advance? I could have prepared roast meat for you." Jack smiled after hearing this and said, "No need. We're not that close." Then Sanji stood in front of Jack, calmly, inviting him upstairs to catch up. But secretly the two had already engaged in a battle of auras. Although Sanji was at a disadvantage, he still refused to back down. So, in this situation, Jack had no choice but to agree to go up and chat. After they left, Fred's anxious heart finally calmed down. That was close. He almost died here. Although his life was saved, many candles were damaged. 2 hours later, Jack's group came down from the second floor. Jack said, "I'm good at reading people. Even your boss has the same opinion as me. If you're tired of the smell of candles, then come work for me." Hearing this, Fred helplessly touched his neck and said, "But they give me food, money, and even a place to sleep." Jack laughed and said, "We can give you these too." Then he flicked a gold coin to Fred, saying, "This is compensation for you." Fred received the gold coin in disbelief. This was the first time he'd seen a gold coin since birth. Jack said, "Come work for me. You can have as many gold coins as you want. When you've decided, come find me at the money house." Jack left the tavern after speaking. Fred behind him looked at the happy crowd and thought, this negotiation have gone smoothly. But unexpectedly, just a while later, he was called upstairs by Mina. In the room, everyone had gloomy faces, heads down and silent. Clearly, the situation wasn't optimistic. After asking Fred to sit down, Sanji handed him a short knife, originally meant as a birthday gift. But now, the situation was urgent. Previously, Jack's odds against Sanji were 50-50, although Jack had many subordinates. Sanji, as a retired knight, was also quite capable, so he could basically maintain the balance of power. But now Jack had actually found an active knight from outside the slums, breaking the balance. With no choice, Sanji had to stop Fred's candle job and gave him a mission that would determine the gang's life or death to be executed in one day. Taking advantage of the free time, Fred quickly seized the opportunity to practice swordsmanship. He was satisfied with his powerful slashing, but a hollow voice rang out beside him. "When you slash, you should reduce the angle of your elbow to increase power." Fred felt a bit helpless after hearing this. He didn't know where the voice came from, but it would only give pointers when he practiced sword. He only remembered that day when he was standing in front of the holy sword, admiring it. A black lightning suddenly struck down from the sky and hit him, but it caused no harm. Only since then, every time he practiced sword, a voice would ring out. This time, Fred couldn't hold back anymore, so he tried to do as the voice said. He closed his eyes tightly, concentrated all his strength in his hands, then raised the stick and struck down with full force. After completing the series of movements, Fred was shocked. What powerful force was this? This was a feeling he'd never had before. Who was this guy? Why was he so familiar with swordsmanship? Actually, even he didn't know who he was. He only vaguely remembered knowing a little swordsmanship. But with his love for swordsmanship, even after death, his soul didn't dissipate. Instead, it attached to the holy sword, becoming a sword soul. 3 days later, Fred came, outside the slums following the guidance. He was to bring back Sanji's old friend, Stanga, to help defend against Jack's group. Things went smoothly. Fred immediately found the legendary knight Stanga, then handed Sanji's letter to him. Stanga received the letter and began reading, learning of Sanji's urgent situation, but he smiled meaningfully. So, you're being attacked by mercenary knights. No wonder you need my help. The situation was urgent. Fred didn't want to delay further. After briefly brushing him off, Fred began leading him on the journey. But staying aside, "I'm not even sure if I should follow you, you fool," Fred said. "But at least I can show you the way you understand." Stang's face darkened after hearing this. "If you take one wrong step, I'll kill you." Seeing the other party trying to intimidate him, Fred ignored it, saying, "Let's go quickly. I don't want to mess up my first mission." Stanga was stunned, thinking, this guy's reaction is really strange. No wonder Sanji likes him. Stanga stared at Fred and followed him. When night came, the two found a cave to rest, but Fred kept staring at Stanga's face. Stanga said, "What? Never seen such a handsome knight." Fred said, "Right." Stanga said, "You really are a country bumpkin." Fred said, "Where are you from?" Stanga said, "Gia." Fred said, "Isn't that even more country bumpkin than a country bumpkin?" Stanga was stunned, completely unable to find a reason to refute, so he threatened Fred again. "Better not get lost," Fred said. "Got it." Then he took out a row of fresh beef. Stanga said, "Is there a share for me?" Fred said, "No, didn't you bring food?" Then Stanga took out 2 pieces of jerky from his pocket and froze. Looking at the fragrant roast beef in front of him, his mouth watered uncontrollably. He said, "How about this? I'll answer one question for you. You give me 1 piece of beef." Fred was silent for a few seconds after hearing this, then said, "If you want to eat beef, just say so." Stanga said, "I have dignity. Knights don't take others' things for free. That's principle." Fred said, "You're already retired." Stanga was stunned again after hearing this. This kid really had a sharp tongue, but Fred wasn't that petty. Still casually asked 2 questions. "Name, age," Stanga said. Stanga, 42, sent. After a few seconds, Fred thought of another explosive question. "Do you know Aura?" After hearing this, Stanga's mouth curved up smugly. "Not every knight knows Aura." Fred said, "If you don't know, just say so." Stanga slowly stood up after hearing this and drew his sword. He held the sword in front of him and began meditating. After a moment, a blue beam of light enveloped Stanga. His eyes and his sword even showed deeper blue. When he opened his eyes, a powerful force emanated from him, almost knocking Fred over. So strong is this aura, just looking at it made one's heart race. Time quickly came to 3 days later. The two successfully returned to the slums. Stanga suddenly noticed something strange. He said, "It's so quiet here. So quiet it's disturbing me." Fred replied irritably, "Because it's night." Stanga said, "Really? Is this place usually like this?" He suddenly darkened his face. Before them were densely packed more than 30 corpses. Fred panicked. He hadn't expected Jack to launch an attack early. Then he quickly told Stanga the tavern's location and rushed back without looking back. The tavern was also in ruins. Fred felt something was wrong, but fortunately, Sanji was only slightly injured. Sanji said, "You brought him back, right?" Fred said, "Yes, he should be arriving soon." Sanji's veins bulged after hearing this. "Good. Tomorrow we'll settle accounts with Jack." Then Sanji changed the subject. "How's that guy been lately?" Fred said, "He's fine. He even demonstrated aura in front of me." Sanji was stunned after hearing this, showing an incredulous expression, and confirmed with Fred repeatedly, but still got the same result. Sanji thought to himself, "Not good. Everyone hide behind me. Stanga doesn't know aura at all." Fred was dumbfounded. If he's not Stanga, then who is he? After a moment, the white-haired man also arrived here. His eyes were full of killing intent. "So you hid here?" "Long time no see, Sanji." Sanji was shocked, quickly protected Fred behind him. Sanji said, After all these years, why won't you let me go? God poured a glass of Lafitte, said, when you disobeyed the Count's orders and chose to be a deserter, your death was sealed. Even though the Count is dead now, Sanji flew into a rage after hearing this. I'm human, not the Count's killing machine. After speaking, he raised his sword and charged. In his anger, he used all his strength and slashed down fiercely, but was dodged by God. Sanji said, such fast speed. Used to ask me for sword instruction. Have you grown to this level now? But Sanji still refused to back down. One sword strike down was blocked by God's sword. Then the two exchanged several more rounds, almost destroying everything around them, but couldn't harm him at all. Seeing this, Fred quickly protected the proprie. After walking outside the hall, Fred said, everyone come up quickly. Sanji, before Fred could finish speaking. Sanji was sent flying out, directly falling to the first floor. Following was God like the Grim Reaper. God said, Sanji, won't you still go back? Then, he slowly walked to the stairs, looking down at Sanji like an ant. Fred beside him saw him distracted. Quickly pulled out a small knife and threw it, but was blocked by Godin. The ambush. Godin glanced at Fred sideways but rushed toward Sanji without looking back. Sanji barely dodged the attack by turning sideways. At this moment, God's patience was completely exhausted. Godin said, Knights should obey orders unconditionally, Sanji. After speaking, he closed his eyes, then held his sword in front of him. A blue pillar of light wound around the sword blade. Fred felt something was wrong. Quickly ran toward the first floor, trying to stop God, but it was too late. When he opened his eyes, with one swing of his sword, countless blades burst forth, destroying everything within a 2 radius. Only the late arriving Fred was spared, but the powerful shockwave still brought him to his knees. When the smoke cleared, Fred saw a scene he would never forget in his lifetime. Sanji was dead. That strongest man who always protected him was dead. Fred's world collapsed instantly. He casually grabbed a sword nearby and charged recklessly. He randomly swung a slash, but Godin dodged sideways. Godin was somewhat surprised. This poor kid actually knew swordsmanship. When he saw Fred raise his sword, he still mercilessly kicked toward Fred's vital point, directly kicking him away. But Fred didn't die. Just this powerful force almost made him unable to breathe. Godin thought, did his body instinctively twist to avoid the vital point? His talent might even be higher than mine. Killing him now would be too wasteful. Better to wait until later. Maybe he can be like me, even surpass the master. Who knows? God smiled, then said, Knights only take what they deserve. I'm not Stanga, and I'm not 42 years old. After speaking, he returned the 2 pieces of jerky to Fred. Godin continued, But I must take what's in my hands. This is my right as a victor. Fred barely heard any of God's words. He now had only one thought, that he must kill Godin. After the two looked at each other, God turned and left. Godin said, Work hard to become stronger. 2 pieces of jerky aren't enough to buy my life. Fred gritted his teeth after hearing this, said, Someday you'll die by my sword. After this, Fred kept squatting here, as if everything in the world had lost meaning. The proprietor, seeing this, directly slapped him. Said, Do you know the difference between people inside and outside the slums? People outside have countless chances to start over, but we only need to fail once and almost everyone dies. After speaking, she grabbed Fred, said, You are our only hope. Live well. After a while, Fred escaped with Mina, but now he was seriously injured and could barely walk. While the slums were full of Jack's subordinates, Fred wiped away his sweat, swearing he absolutely couldn't die here. But just then, Jack's subordinates actually discovered them. Xiao Jia raged, You two are dead. So the two, to avoid being hunted desperately, hid in a shop to avoid implicating Mina. The injured Fred suggested they split up and escape, But Mina started being stubborn after hearing this. She said, "I want to be with you." No matter how much Fred begged, Mina became more stubborn, even began crying softly at the end, but refused to separate. Fred had a headache. Mina was being disobedient at this time, and their commotion was quite loud, just waking up the shop owner. Turning around, the owner had already come over with a lamp. It was the old man from the blacksmith shop. "What are you doing here?" Mina was stunned, hurriedly picked up a knife from the table, said, "Don't make a sound, old man." The old man rolled his eyes. "Is this my house or yours? Why are you so righteous?" Mina said, "I said don't make a sound. Do I really have to stab you before you'll be quiet?" Seeing Mina's serious expression, the old man had to give up. The old man said, "I won't make a sound. Put the knife down." Mina gritted her teeth. Suddenly, remembering the holy sword, might as well go all in. She said, "Old man, hand over the sword you had hanging at the door." The old man was stunned after hearing this, refused her because that sword was more important than his life. He could never give it to mediocre people. Fred also tried to stop Mina, but now she couldn't listen to anyone. Her mind had only one thought, that if she could help Fred get the holy sword, he could definitely leave here alive. Seeing the old man's firm attitude, Mina gritted her teeth, gripped the knife tightly, making a do-or-die gesture. Fred said, "Mina, stop. Don't do anything foolish." The old man also closed his eyes, waiting for her to act. The next second, Mina swung the knife, but cut off her own red hair, said, "I'll give you all this. I'll repay the rest with my lifetime. Please give Fred the sword." The old man was silent for a few seconds after seeing this, then turned his gaze to Fred, asking, "Do you want to leave the slums?" After getting Fred's affirmative answer, the old man fell into thought, not to mention Fred's love for the sword, coming to admire the holy sword at his place every day. Besides, this kid really had some of that guy's style. Maybe he really could fulfill his wish. He was old. Let this kid fulfill that wish. After a moment, the old man and Mina pushed a cart of garbage, preparing to leave the city while Fred was hiding inside with the holy sword, because Jack's subordinates had already sealed off the entire slums. This was the best way to escape. But although the old man was very careful, they were still discovered by a group of Jack's subordinates. They said, "Going to throw garbage so late." The old man directly cursed. "It's because you guys fighting blocked all the alleys, so I couldn't throw the garbage." The thug was stunned. What a grumpy old man. Then he turned his gaze to Mina behind the cart, asking, "Who is she? Isn't your blacksmith shop just you alone?" The old man continued roaring, "I'm tired. Can't I hire someone to help me?" The thug thought, "Forget it. The old man is the only blacksmith in the slums. Can't be too disrespectful to him," but he still pressed his sword against Mina's hat and slashed upward, directly cutting the hat. Mina quickly made a face. Plus, she had already cut her hair. The thug really didn't recognize her. "All right, you can go. We're looking for that blonde kid from Sanji's place." The old man slowly pushed the cart and began to leave after hearing this. Just when they were about to escape unexpectedly, another black thug called out to the old man, said, "Wait, your garbage cart hasn't been inspected yet." Then he had the old man stop the cart to one side. Mina looked panicked, because once the garbage cart was inspected, Fred would definitely be exposed. The black thug looked down, seemingly already aware that Fred was hiding inside. He said, "This is my job. Don't hate me." After speaking, he stabbed the stick hard into the garbage cart. Said, "I heard that idiot Haven sailed the boat to the riverside. Everyone can leave from there." Then he pulled the stick out, said, "All right, you passed." It turned out the black man's brother had once been caught stealing, and to save him, Fred had spent all his 40 silver coins, so to repay him, the black thug deliberately inserted the stick in the wrong place and told him how to leave the slums. Soon, several people arrived at the garbage station outside the city. Mina said reluctantly, "Goodbye, Fred. You must be safe." The boy held Starlight in his hands, forged with the old man's dreams, bought with the girl's tears, so Starlight would definitely shine brilliantly in the boy's hands. Not long after, Fred successfully escaped. He couldn't wait to take out the sword. Fred said, "You can hear me speak, right?" The sword soul's voice slowly rang out. "Yes." Fred continued asking, "Who exactly are you?" The sword said, "I don't know." Fred said, "Good. Then I'll help you recover your memory. You become my sword. How about it? Even if you're a demon, I need your help." Because the Blue Knight who wiped out his entire team was really powerful. His strength was probably dozens of times above Sanji's. Seeing Fred's determined attitude, the Sword Soul's voice rang out, "Good, I'll teach you all my swordsmanship." After Fred escaped from the slums, he became a mercenary group leader, making a living by subjugating monsters. On one hand, it could increase combat experience, adding chips for the final revenge. On the other hand, sometimes there would be challenges. Just after everyone finished clearing the goblin minions, a giant goblin quietly appeared. One club strike viciously smashed toward the mercenary, directly flattening him. This powerful force made everyone afraid to act rashly. But the next second, the giant goblin rushed over at extremely fast speed. Another club strike knocked down 7 or 8 people, then it let out a roar that shook the sky, directly crushing everyone's psychological defense. The mercenary shouted, "Run quickly, we're no match for this kind of monster." However, when the mercenary was escaping, he was killed by the employer with one sword. The employer said, "Hurry up and fight. Deserters die." After speaking, he just looked up. The giant goblin's oppressive presence hit him in the face, making him break out in cold sweat. When everyone was in panic, a blond young man slowly walked toward the goblin, his eyes full of determination. In just an instant, he drew his sword and slashed. The goblin couldn't react in time, but relied on its strong defense to take this hit head-on. The Sword Soul's voice rang out, "Dodge." Fred leaped to avoid the counterattack, but was scolded by the Sword Soul, "You idiot. You couldn't kill it with one strike." Fred felt helpless after hearing this because not everyone had his kind of strength. After a moment, Fred attacked again, but was met with the goblin's fierce counterattack. He could only dodge, dodge, and dodge again, then seizing the gap after the goblin's attack. Fred concentrated, held his breath, swung a powerful slash. This time he didn't miss. One strike beheaded the goblin. The battle ended. This incident also reached the ears of the employer's superior, Knight Jaeger. He was very puzzled how a wet-behind-the-ears kid could have this kind of strength. So he told Joseph about this. Joseph was the second son of Count Bay's family, currently caught in a struggle with his brother for inheritance rights, so he desperately needed powerful swordsmen to help him. After learning about this, he rushed to the front lines without stopping. As soon as he arrived, a foul smell hit him. Jorger said, "Young master, observe these goblins." Joseph looked at them one by one after hearing this. These goblins had neat wounds, each strike precisely hitting vital points. Joseph became more shocked as he looked. Could this all be done by the same person? Jagger said, "Yes, it's the kid I told you about." Joseph's mouth curved up after hearing this. He's a genius. On the other side, Fred and the Sword Soul were arguing about one thing, whether to run away or not. Because Fred had killed a mercenary named Ramen and impersonated his identity to enter the mercenary group. If discovered, identity fraud and murder were both capital crimes. The Sword Soul said sarcastically, "You really are a bad person," Fred retorted. "You're an accomplice too." But actually, it was self-defense, though there were no witnesses. Just to be safe, Fred decided to escape tonight. But just then, a figure slowly approached from behind. Fred quickly assumed an attack stance after noticing. Jorger said, "He noticed my presence. Really an impressive kid." But Jorger still said emotionlessly, "Lord Joseph wants to see you." Fred hesitated for a while, then said, "This is my honor." Then Jorger had Fred follow him. Fred asked carefully, "Should I run away?" But was warned by the sword soul, "Don't even try. A knight of his level will definitely kill you within 3 steps. After hearing this, Fred gave up the idea of escaping. Obediently came to the commander's tent. Joseph spoke first. "Very pleased to meet you," Fred said carefully. "This is my honor, Lord Joseph." Joseph said, "Your name is Rahman." Fred bowed. "Yes." Unexpectedly, he was directly slapped. Joseph closed the book, then looked at Fred. "Seriously, I hate being lied to, Fred from Sola, but strangely we can't find any information about your father." Fred retorted, "That's really funny," but was kicked to the ground by Jorger. Jorger said, "Please mind your manners." Joseph said, "No need for that. A child from the slums, where exactly did you learn swordsmanship? Tell me." Joseph stared into Fred's eyes, quite displeased. Joseph said, "Your eyes hide too much." Jorger behind him slowly drew his sword as if receiving an order. At this moment, Fred knew he couldn't hide anything anymore, so Fred said, "I have a teacher living in my mind who comes out to teach me when I practice swordsmanship." Joseph looked at Fred's determined eyes and didn't see any signs of lying. Joseph said, "All right, I'm sorry for being so rude to you just now." Then Joseph completely changed his attitude. "Do you want power, money, and beautiful women? Then become my knight." However, when Fred sparred with Jorger, Fred was steadily losing ground, facing Jorger's sharp swordsmanship and powerful force. He had almost no way to respond. Others mocked. So Jorger is already trying his best to go easy. If this were real combat, he would have been sliced to ribbons long ago. Even so, after Fred took hundreds of sword strikes, he gradually began to adapt to the rhythm. After blocking one attack, he used the force to press his sword back, then quickly slashed forward. Although blocked by Jorger, this scene made everyone cheer. This progress speed truly worthy of a genius. From being unable to fight back to swinging the first sword, it only took a few hundred lives. Then Jorger also stopped training, practiced twice in the morning and evening from now on. After speaking, he turned and left. Fred was dumbfounded, thinking after practice he doesn't give me any advice. The sword, Soul said, "Getting beaten is the best way to grow. His swordsmanship left you almost no room to think. You could only rely on muscle memory to counterattack. He's a good teacher." Fred said, "Even you won't take my side." Not long after, Jorger returned to the commander's tent, then reported the training results to Joseph. He believed Fred was talented but arrogant and not worth cultivating. Moreover, he wasn't willing when he joined. So, loyalty was also a big problem. Joseph smiled after hearing this. "I believe you can teach him manners. As for loyalty, mutual use will actually make our relationship more solid. He wants to become stronger, and we can help him do that. This will also keep him firmly imprisoned by us." Hearing this, Jorger couldn't say much more. That night, Mercenary go to a standing guard by the camp. The cold weather made him shiver, so he secretly decided to curry favor with team leader Fred to get better advancement opportunities. Just when he was distracted, a knight suddenly appeared before him. But fortunately, they just exchanged a few pleasantries. Then the knight turned and left. Go watched his retreating figure, then closed his eyes, preparing to have a good sleep. But suddenly, a stern rebuke woke him up. "What are you doing here?" Soon the knight spoke again. "No, I'm not your child, you crazy woman." Go stared, dumbfounded at the distant knight talking to himself. Who was he talking to? Without thinking much, God slowly approached step by step. When the two were less than 10 steps apart, the knight suddenly walked quickly in one direction. But that wasn't toward the army camp. Just when God was puzzled, he suddenly saw a ghostly shadow wrapped around the knight. In another blink, the ghost had turned into an unmade woman. The next morning, Fred came down from the early shift covered in aches. He said, "Can't that guy be a little more lenient with me?" The sword soul said, "This is teaching others can only dream of." Fred said, "He looks like he just purely wants to beat me up." Just when the two were bantering as usual, someone suddenly called Fred from behind. "Captain, come here quickly." Go was hiding behind a tree sneakily, then looked around to avoid being discovered because he had decided to escape tonight. Then he told Fred what he saw last night and advised him to escape together. But Fred didn't believe it at all, thinking he was making excuses for being a deserter. Then raised his hand to hit him. Go said, "I'm telling the truth. Even Knight Roderick disappeared yesterday." Hearing this, Fred slowly began to believe. Go said, "Our army has always had deserters, but actually they didn't desert. They were killed by female ghosts, and they all have one common trait, that is black hair." But soon God regretted saying this because Fred not only didn't escape with him, but reported the whole thing. Now he had to lead the search for missing personnel. Jorger felt uneasy because Joseph also had black hair, so he wanted to stay by Joseph's side. But considering that even a strong fighter like Knight Rodri had disappeared, he had to step forward. Soon, several hours of searching passed, but there were still no clues. Helplessly, Jorger could only order his subordinates to continue searching. In a blink, evening came. Go was indignant about Fred's behavior. "I kindly advised you to leave together. How could you treat me like this?" Fred said, "Continue searching, don't chat, I'll give you something later." Just when the two were talking, Jorger nearby said, "Did you find anything?" Fred shook his head. Jorger said, "You're really useless. How do you find people on the streets?" Fred said, "Just grab someone and beat them up. They'll tell you." Hearing this answer, Jorger was speechless. Jorger thought, "It's getting dark now. Should I call them back?" Just when Jorger was thinking, a river in front caught his attention. Upon learning that the other side hadn't been explored, he immediately ordered Go to gather the mercenaries, preparing to cross the river to search the other side. But Jorger found the ice surface didn't seem very solid, so he ordered his subordinates to cross in groups of 3, dispersing across the river. Soon, the mercenaries began crossing one after another. Only Fred and Go were left, but God felt uneasy and was reluctant to cross. He said, "My 6th sense tells me we absolutely can't go over there." Fred said, "No, you're just scared." Go retorted, "Of course I'm scared. I don't have your great strength." Fred said, "So, you want to be a deserter? That won't end well either." Fred suddenly stared at him seriously. Go was startled by these words. Under Fred's repeated demands, he still took the first step forward, but his legs immediately went weak. Then, he collapsed on the ice surface. It was this action that let him see a scene he would never forget in his lifetime. At the same time, Light Priest Andre was praying, but suddenly discovered the holy water was wrapped in eerie black shadows. Sensing something terrible, he quickly reported this to Joseph. This was scripture written with sacred ink. Yet the text on it writhed like ants on a hot pan. This sudden eerie phenomenon meant there were fierce evil spirits nearby. Seeing this, Joseph was terrified inside. Although Andre possessed divine power, facing such fierce demons, he could probably only temporarily suppress them. And now Jorger, who could use light aura, wasn't at the camp. Joseph could only rely on the few remaining knights to fight desperately. After a moment of silence, He didn't hesitate and directly led everyone to face the enemy head-on. However, the camp was already shrouded in black smoke. All mercenaries with black hair began showing symptoms of mental disorder. Seeing this, everyone quickly took protective measures to avoid inhaling the black smoke. But just then, a bone-chilling aura made them instantly tremble. In the distance, a female ghost with a hideous face suddenly appeared. When she noticed Joseph's presence, she actually stopped in her tracks. Then she twisted her head 720 degrees and let out a spine-chilling laugh. She said, "So there you are, my child." In this critical moment, Andre quickly unleashed his holy power to block the ghost's path. At this moment, Joseph finally understood completely that this was a malicious curse carefully designed with him as the target. Who exactly wanted to harm me? Meanwhile, Fred was engaged in fierce combat with the undead. Although his swordsmanship had improved greatly through recent sparring sessions, the undead came like a tide. Even killing 10 with one strike couldn't finish them all. Moreover, he had to protect the weak goad while fighting. This quickly exhausted what little strength he had left. At this moment, Jorga in the center of the lake was also trapped in a bitter struggle. The undead became extremely violent at night, and many mercenaries died horribly at their hands. Jorga was overwhelmed and simply couldn't look after everyone. But what worried him most at this moment was Lord Joseph's safety. Without further hesitation, he directly released his aura power. A slash emanating green radiance swept out unstoppably. Instantly, the undead that had been frantically attacking him were cut to pieces. Jorga shouted, "Fred, fulfill your contract." Hearing Jorga's call, Fred quickly responded, "What should I do now?" Jorga said, "Return to camp immediately to protect Lord Joseph. You must hold on until I get back." Upon hearing this, Fred rushed back to camp without stopping. Suddenly, Jorga sensed a terrifying aura from behind. When he saw who it was, he couldn't help but feel extremely troubled. It was actually Sir Roderick who had become one of the undead. Meanwhile, the situation on Joseph's side was also dire. 2 knights had already been eroded by the curse and fallen unconscious. At this moment, the female ghost was about to break through the sacred barrier. The enormous energy consumption caused the assistant priest to cough up large amounts of blood. Although under Andre's encouragement, the assistant priest quickly reinforced the barrier again. This method of overdraining one's life force could only buy a few moments. Tonight was too difficult for me to endure. I probably wouldn't live to see tomorrow's sun. Thinking this, Joseph seemed to accept fate's arrangement. But suddenly he looked ahead in disbelief. Fred was rushing toward them with his sword in hand. Actually, he had already reached the camp 2.5 minutes earlier. But the sword soul told him not to act rashly because that thing was a moving curse. Ordinary swords couldn't completely destroy it. The only way was to use aura power. So the sword soul needed to possess Fred's body. But this method also required paying a huge price. That was that Fred's body would fall into a temporary state of paralysis. After pondering for a moment, Fred's eyes gradually became resolute. Fred said, "I promised Joseph I would give my life, not loyalty, and I still have something I must accomplish." Then the sword soul began to possess Fred's body, and instantly a powerful aura burst forth. But just when Fred thought this attack would succeed, the female ghost suddenly let out a sharp shriek. In that instant, Fred saw her memories from when she was alive. Fortunately, the sword soul quickly reminded him to close his eyes. This allowed him to successfully summon the voice world deep within his soul. Next, Fred's aura changed dramatically, and countless bolts of lightning enveloped his entire body as a sword light cut through the void. The female ghost also suffered heavy damage under this terrifying power. But at this moment, Fred appeared to be in extreme pain. Overusing power beyond his body's limits made him scream wildly. Seeing the female ghost slowly crawling toward Fred, Joseph had no time to marvel and quickly rushed forward to rescue him. But just as he was helping Fred move forward with difficulty, he was grabbed by the ankle by the female ghost. No matter how he struggled, he couldn't break free. In this moment of crisis, the fat knight stepped forward. Using all his strength, he threw both men toward the safe zone. Joseph successfully survived this ordeal. After resting for a moment, Fred's body also recovered. Fred said, "Father Priest, please bless my sword." Upon hearing this, Andre directly cut open his palm. His blood contained absolute holy power, so the effect would be more significant. Then Fred dragged his weary body, wanting to end all of this. However, when he walked in front of the female ghost, his expression appeared very sorrowful because in the female ghost's memories, he had seen the women imprisoned in the dark dungeon below and the filthy corpses of children. Those soul-piercing cries left Fred's heart in turmoil. Perhaps only the end of life could bring her peace. As Fred thrust the sword imbued with divine power into her body, her soul was completely purified. Her appearance also returned to how she looked when alive. At this moment, the first ray of dawn illuminated the white snow-capped mountains. This great mother could finally see her child again. Meanwhile, the dark sorcerer who had been controlling from the shadows also sensed something. The evil thoughts had been lively and active just moments ago, but now they suddenly dissipated in an instant. Wasn't the intelligence that there was only one knight who could use aura? Thinking this, he immediately prepared to flee. But just then, a voice came that made him tremble instantly. Jorga Knight was staring at him with burning anger. Moments later, Jorga brought his severed head before Joseph. He said, "This wooden box contains the corpse of an infant." The dark sorcerer used this object to control that mother. Upon hearing this, Joseph immediately arranged for personnel to thoroughly investigate this matter. 3 days later, Fred woke from his coma with disheveled hair. He hadn't expected the backlash from aura power to be so severe. He would need to use it more carefully in the future. When he came outside the tent, he discovered the mercenary squad had already left. Only God, who always thought about deserting, remained here. Then Fred went to the main tent to talk with Joseph. The female ghost incident made Joseph appreciate the young man before him even more. Although they only had a verbal contract, Fred still chose to fulfill it fearlessly. This made Joseph eager to possess this genius. Then he expressed his gratitude for Fred's life-saving grace. Joseph said, "Now it's time for me to fulfill the contract. Regarding this incident, I will give you the reward you deserve, and I formally invite you here to join the Bay family." The next day, they set off to return to the capital Sturmgard. Moments later, Joseph truthfully reported the female ghost incident to his father. Learning that a dark sorcerer dared to disturb the Biode family's territory, the Count's face instantly became extremely grim. He immediately ordered elite troops to investigate who was behind this. The Count said, "Anyone who dares threaten my son must be made to feel pain worse than death." Meanwhile, Fred came to the religious center as agreed. After brief pleasantries, Andre handed something very important to Fred. Seeing this, Fred immediately showed complete disbelief. This was actually the identity card he had dreamed of obtaining, and the guarantor written on it was clearly Priest Andre. Thus, this homeless youth finally recorded his name in this vast world. From now on, Fred would completely escape his slum identity. Soon, night fell. Joseph arranged for Go to work in the Bay family stables. Next came discussing the contract issue with Fred. Joseph said, "Although you've decided to draw your sword and charge for me in the future, you once said you had something you must do. I believe the implication of those words is that you need freedom. We must clarify this matter before we can continue discussing. So what exactly do you want to do after gaining freedom? Hearing this, Fred's eyes suddenly became sharp. Half a year had passed, but he had never forgotten that enemy who killed Sanji, who was also the Aura Knight he so admired. Fred said, "Do you know a knight like Blue Moonlight named God?" Upon hearing this, Joseph regretfully expressed that he was also powerless. After all, Godin was Count Gel's trusted minister. But as compensation, Joseph changed the contract term to 7 years. During this period, he would provide Fred with food, clothing, and shelter and train him to become an outstanding knight who would excel anywhere. Additionally, Mina at the convent would receive better care. Fred only needed to obey Joseph's commands unconditionally. The next day, Jorga took Fred to his residence and warned him never to do anything that would damage Joseph's reputation, as the attendants here were usually from wealthy families. So getting along would be difficult to adapt to. As for training, it would still be sparring twice daily, morning and evening. Just then, Joseph's mother, Oksana, unexpectedly appeared here. Looking at her still charming, noble lady appearance, even the proprie of a pleasure house couldn't compare. This made the simple-minded Fred immediately blush. Oksana had come to thank her son's savior. She then placed her hand on Fred's shoulder. She said, "Your golden hair and blue eyes really match well. If you were a bit stronger, you'd look much better. I'll make you a set of clothes soon." Upon hearing this, Fred nervously expressed his gratitude. Then Oksana left this place. Seeing this, Fred finally breathed a sigh of relief. After all, he had never seen such a charming, noble lady in the slums. This made Jorga couldn't help but tease, "I didn't expect you to show such a shy expression." But actually, Jorga was also particularly nervous when facing Oksana. After this small episode, Fred went to the dining hall to eat, but unexpectedly, trouble came so quickly. Group of attendants approached him with ill intentions. Then the leader, Sovaning, acted maliciously. He directly spat a thick glob of phlegm into Fred's bowl. So said, "Oh dear, I'm so sorry. I smelled something foul and thought this was a trash can." As soon as he said this, his lackey burst into laughter. Seeing the situation, Fred remained silent throughout. He calmly picked the phlegm out of his bowl, then continued eating his breakfast as if nothing happened, because Jorga had warned him not to do anything that would damage Joseph's reputation. So Fred was thinking about how to beat them up openly and justly, watching his composed manner. Sewing felt very displeased, but the dining hall was crowded. He couldn't make too big a scene either, so he could only find another opportunity to teach this unlucky guy a lesson. However, just then, Fred asked for his name with a grim face. This terrifying, oppressive feeling instantly made him break out in cold sweat all over. Then Sovaning blurted out his name. Fred said, "Sovaning, right, I'll remember you." A week later, the Count came to the training ground to observe the attendants' training results. He quickly noticed the golden-haired boy that Joseph had taken in. Meanwhile, Jorga was also secretly observing Fred. This instantly ignited the Count's interest. Let's see what his abilities are like then. In the training ground, Fred was grimly preparing for battle because his opponent was one of Sovaning's lackeys. With his exceptional talent and recent training, Fred maintained a dominant advantage throughout. Continuous attacks left his opponent only able to defend passively. As the battle entered its intense phase, Fred used his eyes to mislead his opponent's attack direction. Then with swift steps, he dodged the wooden sword swinging down. When Soning lackey realized he had fallen into a trap, Fred's powerful attack had already followed. The tremendous force sent him flying several meters away. Then Fred grimly grabbed Sovaning's lackey hair, said, "Yesterday in the dining hall you laughed the loudest." With that, Fred threw a punch, striking directly at his face. Even so, Fred still didn't intend to let it go easily. He clenched his fist and frantically pounded Sovning's lackey. Seeing this scene, the Count didn't stop it. After all, to become an excellent knight, one must possess the fighting spirit that makes enemies fear. Meanwhile, Jorga also showed a satisfied expression. Back in the training ground, Sovning's lackey had completely fallen unconscious. Only then did Fred leave with satisfaction. Then he came before Sovning said, "Once I enter combat, I always can't come to my senses, so please help me apologize to that guy. But I won't let this end just because I beat up a lackey. If the soup isn't salty enough, I'll come find you, and then you can spit some more saliva for me." Upon hearing this, Svenning was so frightened by his terrifying aura that he froze in place with beads of sweat soaking his clothes. Lord Joseph brought back a mad dog from the back alley. Then Fred went to the dining hall to eat, while God was still worried whether Fred would be expelled for fighting. Fred was completely unconcerned. That was just normal sparring between attendants. Not to mention that he challenged me first. After hearing this, Go felt relieved. Just as the two were chatting, a little fat boy suddenly spoke. "My name is Portly." After saying this, he began to stammer. Fred found it annoying and told him to sit down and talk. Portly was immediately surprised upon hearing this. He was very grateful that Fred let him sit here. Then Portly saw the sausage in Fred's hand. He said proudly, "This is supplied by my father. I can share sausages with you." Fred was about to say, "Do you think I'll protect you just because you do this?" But the next second, the dazzling array of sausages before him was truly shocking. Fred was stunned for 3 seconds before reacting, then said, "We're all attendants. Let's get along well from now on." Of course, it's not because of the sausages. The next day, Jorga was preparing to train Fred. At this time, Gregory called out to him. After some pleasantries, he got to the point. Gregory said, "Can you get Fred to get closer to Portly? After all, Portly is my nephew, and I can't let him get bullied every day. I can't ask others for this favor, so I can only ask you." Jorga asked, "Is it free?" Gregory replied, "Of course not. If this matter is resolved smoothly, I'll let you call on me for free once in the future." Jorga said nothing more. Actually, even without Gregory asking, Fred would get closer to Portly anyway. After all, he could get free sausages. On the other side, in the stables, God was still teasing Fred about wanting to become a knight, but not even knowing how to ride a horse. Fred was also helpless. After all, for a long time, now, normal animals would show fearful expressions when they saw Fred, as if they had seen a ghost. But that day, he had successfully mounted a horse. Goat explained, "That's because Sir Jorga's horse is particularly expensive. If it weren't for the critical situation, then we probably wouldn't have been able to ride it." After hearing this, Fred fell into thought. Just then, a maid walked over and said, "Lady Oksana requests your presence." Both were stunned for a moment. Sometime later in Lady Oksana's main hall, Fred had already changed into a new set of clothes, hand-sewn by Oksana. Lady Oksana said it suited Fred very well, and she would make him another set when summer came. Fred shilly expressed his gratitude, and then slowly left. Looking at the clothes he was wearing, Fred couldn't help but become thoughtful. Just as he looked toward the window beside him, he actually saw a group of people beating up Lee. His expression also changed from relaxed to serious. It seemed tonight wasn't suitable for wearing these clothes. Then he changed into old clothes and knocked on Portly's door. Portly opened the door, revealing his bruised and swollen face. Fred was stunned for a moment. Then he told Portly to give him the whole ham behind him. Portly's face fell upon hearing this, but he still took out the ham and handed it to Fred. Fred told Portly not to feel too wronged because this was his deserved payment. Then Fred came to the training ground. which was already packed with people. Looking at the aggressive crowd, Fred showed a fierce expression. It seemed blood would be shed today. Next, Fred wielded his sword randomly in the crowd, beating everyone until their heads were bloody. Seeing this, Sovning was shocked. This was simply a mad dog. Then he ordered everyone not to retreat and all charged forward. Before he finished speaking, Fred had already moved to Sovning's front. Seeing this, Sovning quickly swung his sword, but his swordsmanship was completely without method, and Fred easily dodged. Then Fred swung his sword. Sovning was directly hit, but this was just the beginning. Fred swung his sword again. Sovning was no match and fell directly to the ground, still crying out in pain. But this didn't earn Fred's sympathy. Fred then thrust his sword down. Sovning was greatly alarmed, thinking, "This guy isn't going to kill me, is he?" With a crack, Sovning cried out. Everyone was startled, but looking over, the wooden sword had only grazed past Sovning's ear. Fred threatened, "Don't make eye contact with me from now on, and don't bully the fat kid anymore." Sovning nodded in fear. Then, Fred stood up and looked at the crowd. Everyone was scared into cold sweats. Then came sounds of painful wailing. The next day, the Knights' Hall held its monthly meeting. The team split into two lines. Those supporting Rucker stood in one line. Those supporting Joseph and those remaining neutral stood on the other side. At the front, standing between the two lines, was the Knight Commander. Sometime later, the meeting ended perfectly, and everyone walked out of the great hall, looking at the furious expressions of Rucker's knights. Jorger turned and smiled faintly. After all, yesterday, Fred had beaten up their attendants. The others didn't want to deal with him and turned to leave. Jorger didn't pay them much attention either. Just as he returned to the hall, a set of exquisite armor appeared before his eyes. Joseph said this was a gift from Lord Count. Even Jorger was stunned. After all, earning Lord Count's appreciation was truly not easy. Moreover, this armor was made from grey half-orcs. Seeing the scene, Joseph smiled with satisfaction. Then he took out an envelope and said, "It's time for the next step of the plan. We're setting off for Derma." The next day, the large force was traveling on the road. Joseph explained to Fred, "Derma is rich in various fruits, and is also one of the gateways to the central region. This is crucial for the northern people. Currently, the Hinar family is experiencing succession disputes. Our purpose on this trip is to help the legitimate heir regain his position. We can use this opportunity to make the Hinar family owe us a big favor." Only then did Fred realize, saying, "So, that's why you're having Sir Jorger take action." Then he turned to look at Jorger. Jorger noticed this impolite gaze. He said angrily, "How did I end up teaching an idiot like you who still can't even ride a horse?" Fred tried to explain, "Maybe I can ride expensive horses." Hearing this, Jorger became even angrier, saying, "You want to ride expensive horses? More like the horse should ride you." Suddenly, Fred's heart began beating violently. He felt like something bad was about to happen. Before he could think more, the ground began to shake. Seeing the situation, Fred quickly kicked open the carriage door, then protected Joseph under his body, but Joseph told him not to panic too much. This was just a death worm moving underground. Death worms were also called remnants of fallen dragons. Hearing this name, Fred also smiled slightly, fantasizing about having such a cool title himself someday. Then several people continued forward and finally arrived at the city of Derma. After entering the city, Joseph told Fred to go see for himself, preferably to secretly observe the knights warm two-up matches and learn something if possible. Fred understood. So this was what seeing for himself meant. Jorger on the side added, "You'd better not get killed by some knight." After saying this, both men left. So Fred began wandering around. The sword soul suddenly said, I think I've been here before. I have an impression of those trees on the mountain over there. Fred understood, saying, "You teach me swordsmanship. I hope you recover your memories. It seems we have another place to pray in the future." Then Fred came to the hillside. He first respectfully paid his respects to the tomb's owner and brushed away the accumulated fallen leaves. Then he drew his sword, thrust it straight into the ground and began to pray. The sword soul seemed to remember something. He seemed to have come here with someone before when the tree wasn't this tall. At this time, the sword soul seemed to sense something. Then he controlled Fred's consciousness and looked carefully. He saw a giant python coiled around the tree. The sword soul explained this was a spirit. Fred suddenly understood. No wonder he didn't feel fear, but rather a hint of warmth. Just then, footsteps came from behind. The sword soul immediately disappeared. The woman was plainly dressed, but this didn't affect her beauty at all. Fred quickly sheathed his sword and explained, "Sorry, I was just looking for a quiet place to pray and unknowingly came here." Then he took out his identity card. The woman carefully examined it and found no problems. Then she stared blankly at Fred. Fred broke the silence first, saying, "You're a maid here, right? Can we make a deal? I'll help you clean the tomb, but you don't spread word about this." After all, Fred was still afraid of Jorga's anger. While the woman was thinking, Fred directly grabbed the cleaning equipment. The woman smiled faintly, then said proudly, "That depends on how hard you work." Fred was helpless and could only sigh. Beautiful women were indeed scary, watching Fred working hard at cleaning. The woman was also amused by this scene. The next day at the Hinar family training ground, Fred was hiding in the shadows at this time, secretly watching the knights spar. As he watched, Fred began to wonder. They were all knights. Why was Balden's level so low? Sometime later, the day of the duel finally arrived. Fred was organizing equipment for Jorger. Then he caught a glimpse from the corner of his eye. He saw Andrew, who wanted to usurp the position. Jorger advised him, "Don't get distracted. Night battles aren't something you can easily see. Although I don't know what you saw yesterday, start with the basics." After the guidance, Fred also relaxed a bit. Just then, the door opened. A dignified and beautiful woman entered. Lady Alicia entered. Seeing who it was, Fred thought, "This is bad. Yesterday I seem to have called her a maid." Just as Alicia passed by Fred, she glanced over. She looked at Fred with an expressionless face. Fred was instantly scared into cold sweats by this scene. Then Alicia sat on the throne. The priest also announced the start of the duel. The 6 knights also looked at each other in the first match. Because Knight Duncan was old and frail, he was quickly beaten and covered in wounds. Fortunately, Alicia couldn't bear it and chose to surrender in the first match. Duncan never expected that the person he had trained would backstab his own lord. He truly had no face to meet the old master. The second match was Jorga's turn. The 2 men were immediately aggressive upon meeting. Then Jorga gripped his sword tightly, ready to strike. For this kind of central wild boar, Jorga didn't even need to take it seriously. He could dodge attacks, just by casually moving his body. To outsiders, it looked like Colin was suppressing Jorga, but experts could tell that Jorga was just toying with his opponent. Then Colin used both hands with force and swung his sword at Jorga. Jorga was completely calm. He directly used the counterattack technique. Counterattack technique, as the name suggests, forcibly twist the opponent's attack, causing the enemy to expose weaknesses. After this technique was used, Sir Colin could only surrender helplessly. After all, they weren't even on the same level. Upon hearing victory, Alicia also breathed a sigh of relief. The third match was Uviel against Barbaro. Barbaro came on aggressively saying, "I am Barbaro of Arghanistan." Uviel looked very relaxed. Then he looked toward Alicia nearby. Alicia looked confused. The next second, Juvio bowed and said, "I decide to forfeit this duel." Everyone was stunned upon hearing this. Only then did Joseph realize he had been played. Meanwhile, Andre laughed loudly and declared his victory. Joseph was naturally displeased and immediately said, "Our family will not agree to this kind of duel." After hearing this, several people began discussing among themselves as they didn't want to go to war with him. Andre backed down, saying, "Do you still have anyone who can replace Juvia?" Joseph remained calm, then pointed to Fred, who was watching from the side. Andre said angrily, "He's just an attendant. I don't agree." Having an attendant fight would only disgrace the family name. Hearing this, Joseph's anger surged toward everyone, saying, "And what you're doing doesn't disgrace the family name." Everyone's thoughts were exposed, and their bodies trembled, so they could only reluctantly agree to Joseph. After all, what waves could a mere attendant make? Then Fred prepared to enter, but Joseph called out to him. Then Joseph hugged him and whispered, 10 minutes. You just need to hold on for 10 minutes. After hearing the order, Fred immediately said, "Don't worry, I'll do my best." Fred walked before Alicia and bowed, then turned to face Barbaro directly. Barbaro said, "You're not qualified to make me introduce myself." Then he threw away his shield, drew a long sword, and declared he would crush Fred's arrogance. Fred wasn't intimidated, but faced the difficulty head-on. Both men were at sword point, but Barbaro's strength was too great, and Fred was directly knocked back. Fortunately, the sword soul revealed Barbaro's weakness was his shoulder. Otherwise, Fred would have been defeated within 2 moves. Even Barbaro was shocked. This kid was truly gifted. His eyes were like those of a hungry wolf. Although very imposing, there was still a vast difference between knights and attendants. Fred was directly suppressed and forced to kneel. Then Barbaro struck again with his sword. Fred was directly knocked flying and crashed heavily into the wall. Barbaro said, "You're excellent, but still far from enough." With that, he raised his sword to give Fred the final blow. At this critical moment, Fred swung his sword forward, deflecting Barbaro's attack. Everyone was shocked because what he used was actually the counter-attack technique. At this time, Fred's consciousness began to gradually fade. He was mumbling something under his breath. Barbaro noticed something abnormal. This was dreaming of some consciousness from memory. In his mind's consciousness, the youth stood blankly in the extremely dark back alley. But what he yearned for was the town radiating brilliant light. Then his consciousness returned to normal, and his will became even more determined. Brilliant flowers also bloomed on the youth before his eyes. Then their attacks continued clashing, even though both hands were bloody and mangled. His unyielding will made him get up again and again. At this time, Barbaro seemed to see something and was stunned for a second. Fred's sword began to tremble uncontrollably, making buzzing sounds. Barbaro immediately realized this kid was about to bloom. "Then I'll fulfill my duty as a knight." Then he began attacking fiercely just to awaken the light that was about to awaken within the youth. Suddenly an aura burst from Fred's sword. Everyone simultaneously thought this was the precursor. Barbar hurriedly shouted, "Give me the shield." Then said, "Seriously, I am Barbar of Arghanistan, youth who has gained qualification. State your name." Fred had already entered his own world at this time. Looking at the glorious city before him, Fred finally realized he had gained qualification. Then a ray of light gradually condensed in his left eye, and he shouted, "I am Fred of Dia!" In an instant, brilliant light bloomed. Barbaro also gave the highest respect and activated his own aura. The two energies instantly collided. When the light faded, Barbaro looked at the youth before him with satisfaction. Joseph and Jorga immediately expressed their gratitude to Barbaro. Barbaro said this was what he should do, and he was also honored to witness a newly bloomed flower. Then Joseph turned to the priest and said, "Since Fred awakened his aura in this duel, in this case, the rules of sacred duels would conflict with the Swordmaster's code." The priest was stunned. Clearly this problem had stumped him. At this time, Joseph suggested the duel be suspended. The next day, within the Hainar family, Fred lay weakly in bed as if all his bones had fallen apart. He quickly asked someone nearby for a glass of water, but the person before him was actually Joseph. Fred immediately became alert. He hurriedly took the glass of water, then said he was fine now. Hearing that Fred was okay, Joseph said, "Thanks to you awakening your aura this time.